Hi. Cinder Bluff. Evening. Flames devoured the barn like wolves tearing flesh. The sky pulsed orange and black as Harlan Crow's 6 riders circled. Rifles raised, daring anyone to intervene. Clayton Reese shouted, raw, defiant. But the crackle of fire swallowed his voice. He gripped his rifle, teeth clenched, watching everything he'd worked for vanish into smoke. Then the impossible happened. With a roar like thunder, ice-cold water burst through the barn floor, upward like a geyser, knocking 2 men clean off their horses. The blaze hissed and choked. Flames died mid-leap. Silence fell. Every soul in Cinder Bluff stood still, staring. The fire hadn't been put out. It had been erased by something older than timber and flame. Clayton lowered his weapon. He hadn't just found water. He'd awakened something buried. And now the whole town had seen it. Just a week earlier, Clayton Reese had been another shadow in the dust. Forgotten by most, avoided by the rest. He lived in a sagging shack at the town's edge, where the grass gave up and the wind never stopped. Each morning he walked to the mill, where he loaded timber for men who never spoke his name. They called him Reese's boy, as if the sins of a vanished father clung to the blood like mud on boots. The sheriff wouldn't meet his eyes. Store clerks handed him change without a word. No one asked where he came from, and no one cared where he'd go. Clayton didn't blame them. His grandfather, Silas Reese, had once been a respected man in Cinder Bluff, until he started speaking of deep veins and symbols in the dirt. He claimed the land itself was keeping secrets. When Silas died, folks said he'd gone mad. When Clayton's father tried to prove him right, he disappeared without a trace. Since then, the Reese name meant ghosts and grief. Clayton had no one left. His mother died when he was 10, and Silas raised him the best he could. But the fire that once burned in the old man had faded to ash. He left behind only a journal, bound in leather, worn from years of weather and work. Inside, pages of sketches, cryptic maps, and symbols carved like prayers. Clayton read it every night, though he understood little. Still, the weight of the book felt like something alive in his hands, like it wanted to be understood. He kept to himself. No drinking, no gambling, no fights. But isolation hardens a man. The only sound in his home was the wind sighing through cracks in the wall and the quiet scratch of a pencil as he traced the symbols over and over, trying to make them speak. He didn't expect answers. He didn't expect anyone to care. The barn on the edge of the Reese property had been silent for decades. Folks said it was cursed. Others said it should be burned to the ground. So when Clayton used the last of his wages to buy it from the land office, the town laughed behind his back. Reese's boy buying ghosts. But something in him, some whisper of Silas's voice, told him the story wasn't over. Not yet. It was nearly midnight when Clayton heard the knock. Not the wind brushing against his sagging door. Not the creak of settling timber or the lonely call of a whip-poor-will outside. This was sharp, intentional. He stood from his cot, bones aching from the day's labor, and crossed the room barefoot. For a moment he hesitated. No one knocked on his door. Not in the dead of night, not ever. Whoever stood out there knew who he was. That made it strange. And dangerous. He lifted the latch slowly and opened the door to find Josie Bell standing on his porch. Pale in the moonlight, wrapped in a gray coat with the hem wet from dew. She looked less like a visitor and more like a ghost blown in from the fog. "I hope you don't mind," she said softly, voice barely louder than the wind. "I wouldn't come if it wasn't important." Clayton had seen her before. Tall, quiet, always at the edge of things. She worked part-time at the general store and spent the rest caring for her mother. Folks didn't say much about Josie, but when they did, it came with a hush, like mentioning a name the town didn't quite know what to do with. He opened the door wider. "You better come in." She stepped inside without hesitation, her eyes scanning the small space. Just a cot, a table, a stove, and a battered journal lying open beside a half-burned candle. "I heard you bought the old Reese barn," she said. Clayton nodded, cautious. "People in town think you're either a dreamer or a madman." She pulled off her gloves slowly. "Maybe you're both." He didn't reply. There was no need. She moved closer to the table, eyes falling on the journal. My mother used to talk about your grandfather. Said he was the only one in Cinderbluff who looked down instead of up. Everyone else was too busy reaching for the sky. Silas Reese wanted to know what lay beneath. Clayton's breath caught. No one outside his family had ever spoken that name aloud without mockery. Josie reached into her coat and unfolded a slip of paper. The corners were curled. The ink faded, but the handwriting was firm. She laid it gently beside the journal. He didn't abandon the barn. He was forced to leave. Find what others fear. It was signed simply M. Bain. Clayton stared at the note. The name Bain was familiar. He'd seen it etched into a sketch in the back of Silas's journal. A door hidden beneath the barn floor. Next to it, 3 words in his grandfather's hand. Bain, 1854. Sealed. Forgotten. Josie watched him. She gave it to me before she passed, she said. Said I'd know when it was time to deliver it. I didn't understand what she meant, until I saw you clearing the barn. My mother said you'd come to dig. Clayton sat slowly, as if the weight of the paper had pressed him down. Why bring this to me now? Because I believe you, Josie said. And because someone else once believed your grandfather too. She just never had the chance to say so before it was too late. She reached into her satchel and pulled out something else. A torn piece of cloth with a strange symbol stitched into it. 3 concentric circles, like ripples on a still pond. This was on the back wall of the Bain hearth. Carved into the stone, nearly worn away. I thought it was just old design. But then I saw it again. Right here. She pointed to the matching mark in Silas's journal. Clayton's heart beat faster. I don't know what you're looking for, she continued. But I think they buried more than water under that barn. I think they buried something they were too afraid to understand. He flipped through the pages, hand trembling. Every symbol he'd traced, every riddle he'd stared at for years. Suddenly it felt like the pieces were no longer scattered. They were pointing slowly toward something. And for the first time, someone else saw it too. Why me? He asked quietly. Josie met his eyes. Because you stayed when you could have left. Because your name still carries weight, even if the town pretends it doesn't. And because I think you want the truth more than you want to be safe. She stepped back toward the door. Clayton looked down at the note again. Find what others fear. He remembered how the barn felt when he stood in it. Hollow like a mouth waiting to speak. Josie paused at the threshold. The town is run by men like Harlan Crow now. Men who build their lives on secrets and keep power by making sure nothing ever changes. If you find something in that barn, something real, they'll come for it. Be ready. Clayton nodded once. Josie offered the faintest smile. Good luck, Clayton Reese. Then she disappeared into the mist, leaving him alone with the flickering candle, the open journal, and a name no one else had dared to speak in years. For the first time in his life, Clayton felt it. Not fear, not doubt, but purpose. Something had stirred in the dark. And tomorrow he would dig. At first light, Clayton packed his tools into a canvas satchel. Shovel, pickaxe, crowbar, and a leather bundle containing Silas's journal. He didn't pause to eat. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. The fog hadn't yet lifted, but something inside him had. A resolve he hadn't felt in years. He walked the half-mile to the barn in silence. Cinder Bluff lay still behind him, unaware. The barn sat like a forgotten relic at the edge of the Reese property, leaning slightly to one side. Its timbers were sun-bleached and cracked. Half the shingles had blown away. Even the crows avoided it. No one had set foot inside in years. Until now. Clayton pushed the creaking door open and stepped inside. Light slanted through the gaps in the roof, illuminating dust that swirled like memory. The air smelled of dry hay and old wood, but underneath that, something else. A faint mineral tang, like the scent before a rain. He took out the journal and opened it to the page marked by a rusted nail. A hand-drawn sketch showed the barn's interior. 10 paces from the door, 5 left, under the north wall. There, marked with an X, was something Silas had never spoken of aloud. Clayton counted his steps and tapped the floor with his boot. Hollow. He dropped to his knees and began to dig. The dirt was dry and stubborn, but it gave way in time. The shovel struck stone, then iron. He cleared the soil carefully, revealing a square plate the size of a wagon wheel, its edges sealed with black tar hardened by age. Across the center was a name, Bain, 1854. Below that, engraved with chilling finality, "Let no man open what the earth has hidden." Clayton ran his fingers across the words. He thought of Widow Bain's note. He didn't abandon the barn. He was forced to leave. What had they found down here? He brushed away more dirt and saw that the plate was secured with 4 bolts, each one rusted but intact. He hesitated. This was no ordinary well cover. It wasn't made to be opened by chance. But he was past the point of turning back. He took the crowbar and began loosening the bolts. One by one, they gave with a groan of protest. Finally, with a deep breath, he wedged the bar beneath the edge of the plate and pried. It moved just an inch, but enough. A rush of cold air shot upward like a breath held too long. It smelled of stone, iron, and old water. Clayton leaned over the gap, held the lantern down, and saw what lay beneath. A shaft, stone-lined, deep, circular, and at the bottom water, black and unmoving. He lowered the lantern deeper. Symbols lined the shaft walls, not just scratches but carvings, spirals, suns, shapes that echoed the markings in Silas's journal. Not English, not Apache, older. He'd found it, an underground artesian spring, tapped by someone long ago, then sealed and forgotten. His grandfather had written of veins that run like buried rivers, of truth under pressure. This wasn't just water. It was untouched water, pure and cold, forced upward by the weight of the earth itself. Enough to irrigate 100 farms. Enough to shift power in Cinderbluff. Clayton sat back, breathing hard. He could see it now, why the Bain family had disappeared. Why his grandfather had spent his life whispering warnings into empty rooms. Why no one spoke of the barn, only of curses. They hadn't imagined it. They'd protected it. And now he had uncovered it. He stood, looking around the dim interior of the barn, and felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not fear, but awe. The earth had kept this secret for 70 years. But now the secret had a witness. He sealed the shaft again, covered it carefully, and spread straw across the floor to hide the disturbance. Then he sat on a bale of rotted hay and opened the journal once more, rereading the last passage Silas had written. The town is dry above, but below rivers. The day they rise, men will have to choose. Drink together or drown alone. Clayton closed the book. He knew what came next. The barn would not stay untouched. If anyone found out, if Crow's men saw what he had seen, they'd come with money, with threats, with fire. He thought of Josie's words. Men like Harlan Crow keep power by making sure nothing ever changes. This well wasn't just water. It was change. And change in a town like Cinderbluff came with a cost. Clayton spent the next few days in silence. He returned to the barn twice more, taking measurements, drawing maps, copying the wall symbols onto fresh paper. Each time he went, he brought no tools, just observation. He didn't want to disturb anything further until he understood it. But on the 3rd day, someone followed him. He heard the hoofbeats before he saw the rider. From behind the barn, he watched as Harlan Crow himself rode up, dismounted, and walked the perimeter. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a trimmed mustache and eyes like iron filings, sharp and cold. Behind him came 6 men on horseback, all armed. Crow ran his hand along the barn wall like he owned it. Then he knocked once, just once, on the side. A signal. Clayton watched from behind a hay wagon, breath held. Crow turned to his men. "He's found something. I want it." One of the riders, a thin man with a red bandana, spoke. "You want us to scare him off?" Crow shook his head. "Not yet. Offer to buy it first. If he won't sell, then we burn the past." Clayton's fists clenched. He stepped back, deeper into the shadows, and waited until they rode off. They knew. Not everything, but enough. By the time he returned to his shack, the first threat was waiting for him. A note pinned to his door with a knife. Name your price, or lose everything. No signature. None needed. Clayton took the knife, folded the note, and set them both on the table beside Silas's journal. The time for silence had ended. The water was rising. The threat didn't come with a bullet. Came with silence. Clayton found it waiting for him after his walk into town. A sheet of paper pinned to his cabin door with a Bowie knife. The paper was clean. The message was not, "Name your price, Reese, before the fire does." No signature. No initials. But the knife was custom. Black hilt, silver tip, engraved with a horse skull. He'd seen it once before, on Harlan Crow's belt during a town meeting. Clayton pulled it free, folded the note, and set them both on his table beside Silas's journal. Then he sat, staring at the dim lantern light flickering across the page that had led him this far. A sketched map of the barn, symbols etched in the margins, and the words scrawled in his grandfather's hand. Let no man own what belongs to all. He looked toward the window, past the hills, toward the barn half hidden in the mist. They would come soon, but he wouldn't run. That morning he didn't go to the barn. He went to town. He walked slowly, deliberately. Past the livery, the saloon, the stone-faced men at the general store. Past the preacher on his porch and the banker leaning against his columned office, who narrowed his eyes as Clayton passed. Everyone saw him. No one spoke. Until Josie. She stepped out of the store with a parcel under her arm and urgency in her voice. They came last night. 3 of them. Crow's men. I know, Clayton said. They left me a message. They asked about the barn. Said the town might want to buy it back. Called it a matter of public interest. Clayton snorted. Funny. The town's never had interest in that land before. Josie hesitated. My mother said there was talk. Quiet, but real. That the sheriff's been offered a donation to help the claim change hands. Clayton shook his head. The land office sealed the deed. The inspector's on his way. They know, she whispered. That's why they're rushing. Before the truth's written down in ink. Clayton turned to go, then paused. You still believe me? Josie met his eyes without blinking. I believed your grandfather. And I believe in what you found. Then she handed him a small, folded bundle. Supplies. Tools. Just in case you can't come back into town for a while. By midday, the barn had been breached. Clayton found the back door splintered. The lock kicked in. Inside, 3 sets of muddy boot prints circled the sealed shaft. They'd uncovered part of the straw, tried to pry the plate, and failed. But they'd left another message. Spray of oil across the western wall, and a half-burned torch on the ground. Clayton covered the plate again, repacked the straw, cleaned the oil as best he could. He didn't report it. What good would it do? The law answered to Crow now. And even the sheriff, who once shared drinks with Silas Reese, hadn't come knocking. Not to ask, not to warn. No, this was going to end outside the law. And soon. It began with smoke. 3 nights later, under a moonless sky, Clayton awoke to the scent of burning timber. He threw off his blanket and ran barefoot toward the glow cresting over the hill. The barn. It was aflame. He reached the field as the fire roared through the upper beams, licking across the roof like a tongue made of knives. Shadows darted beyond the perimeter, men on horseback watching. His rifle was in hand. He raised it, fired twice into the air. The figures scattered, but the fire kept growing. Clayton sprinted toward the entrance, but just as he neared, the ground beneath the barn gave a long, low groan. Then it happened. A deafening crack split the night. The barn shuddered, and the sealed plate beneath it blew open with a thunderous roar. A geyser of water, ice-cold, pressure-fed, shot upward, scattering flaming shingles and dousing half the structure in a single breath. 2 of the arsonists, caught too close, were thrown to the ground, coughing and scrambling away through the steam. The fire hissed, struggled, and died. In seconds, the barn was soaked, charred, but standing. And the whole town, woken by the gunfire and the unnatural sound, came running. By dawn, the field was full. Dozens stood at the barn's edge, silent, watching steam rise from the wet ashes. Men in shirt sleeves, women clutching children, the preacher, the blacksmith, and the schoolteacher. All gathered in the early light. Josie was there too, and so was Harlan Crow. He arrived last, riding a white mare, with 6 riders flanking him like a funeral procession. He didn't dismount, just looked over the scene with cool calculation. "What happened here?" he asked. No one answered. The crowd parted as the territorial land inspector stepped forward. A lean man with sunburned skin and a folder tucked under his arm. "Mr. Crow," he said, "I arrived last night, as requested by Mr. Reese. I reviewed the deed, the claim, and the geological reports." He tapped the folder. "There is indeed an artesian spring beneath this land. Untapped. Natural. Legal." Crow's eyes narrowed. "Water under town land belongs to the town. The barn is outside municipal bounds. Survey lines prove it." Crow's voice turned darker. "Then it's dangerous. What if the spring floods? What if it undermines nearby property?" Clayton stepped forward. "It didn't flood. It saved the town. It stopped a fire you helped start." The crowd murmured. Crow's horse shifted. The inspector held up a document. "The well is real. The claim is valid. And Mr. Reese has legal ownership. The town cannot intervene without a petition and proof of hazard." Someone in the crowd spoke up. "We saw it. The water saved the barn." Another added, "Might save the rest of us, too." Crow's jaw clenched. "This land belongs to fools and lunatics. You think water makes you a leader?" "I don't," Clayton said. "But hiding it does." He held up Silas's journal. "My grandfather tried to warn you. You called him mad. You let him die alone. But he left the truth behind. And now, it's not hidden anymore." Josie stepped beside him. "This isn't about one man. It's about the town. What kind of place we want to be. One that drinks together or drowns apart." Crow turned his horse, spitting in the dirt. "Mark my words. This isn't over." Then he rode off. His riders followed, but slower. Some looked back. Some didn't. That night, the town didn't sleep. People came to Clayton's shack quietly in 2s and 3s. They brought gifts, questions, offers to help. Not just for him, for the land, the well, the future it promised. An old farmer offered timber to rebuild the barn. The schoolteacher asked if she could bring the children to see the spring. The preacher, eyes heavy with memory, said simply, "I should have listened to Silas." By morning, things had shifted. Not all at once. Not with banners or fanfare. But subtly. Crow's name no longer carried fear in the street. And Clayton's name, spoken in full now not as Reese's boy, was said with something close to respect. The inspector filed his report that same afternoon. The spring was verified. The deed stood. The water belonged to Clayton Reese. And just like that, the balance shifted. By the following week, a territorial officer arrived with documents in hand. Official confirmation that the Reese claim was now recognized by the state. The well was no longer a secret, no longer a myth passed down in half-remembered whispers. It was real, and it had a name, Reese Spring. Harlan Crow tried to fight it. He petitioned the town council, lobbied the district judge, even claimed the well was hazardous and should be sealed. But every accusation collapsed under witness testimony. Over a dozen townspeople had seen the water burst through and save the barn. Josie submitted a signed statement. So did the mill foreman. Even the sheriff, reluctant at first, admitted under oath that Crow's men had been near the barn the night it caught fire. One by one, the pillars of Crow's empire began to crumble. His allies grew distant. His threats rang hollow. And when a formal investigation revealed forged documents in his land holdings, Crow was given a choice. Leave town or face charges. He packed before sundown. No one saw him off. And Cinder Bluff, long silent beneath his rule, finally breathed. Clayton didn't celebrate. He got to work, with help from neighbors, some he hadn't spoken to in years. He cleared the barn ruins, reinforced the spring opening, and built a channel that would carry water into town. A basic irrigation line for now, but the beginnings of something more. The land inspector returned one last time to offer advice on sustainable use. Before leaving, he said, "What you've got here, Mr. Reese, is bigger than one man. Use it well." And Clayton intended to. A week later, children came with pails to fetch water. Farmers filled barrels. The church used the spring to feed the flower beds that had long been dry. The town had changed, not because of money, but because one man had chosen to reveal what others tried to bury. And Cinder Bluff was ready to grow again. 6 months had passed since the fire and the flood that followed it. The land had changed. So had the people. Reese Spring now flowed openly across the edge of Cinder Bluff, channeled through wooden troughs and shallow ditches. Farmers dipped buckets to water their fields. Livestock drank freely. Wildflowers, once strangled by dust, returned in soft reds and stubborn yellows along the stream bank. Children played there each day, barefoot, sun-soaked, chasing frogs and floating sticks like rafts on a river that had waited generations to be found. Clayton Reese watched them from the porch of his new home. The cabin stood near where the barn had once been, its walls built with help from the same neighbors who once turned away when they heard his name. Now they greeted him, brought gifts, asked advice. They didn't call him Reese's boy anymore, just Clayton. He sat with a cup of coffee in hand, the late spring breeze lifting the scent of grass and wet earth. It was still quiet, but no longer hollow. No longer the silence of exile, but the calm of something earned. Josie arrived late in the morning, riding up the trail with dust on her coat and a folded envelope tucked under her arm. She dismounted, smiled, and handed him the letter. He opened it with careful fingers. Territorial Office of Land and Resources. Final notice. Cooperative Water Protection Plan. Approved. Henceforth, Reese Spring is protected by citizen stewardship, immune from commercial claims, and to be shared freely among the residents of Cinder Bluff. Authority. Office of the Governor, Territory of New Mexico. Signed, Alan R. Boone. Clayton exhaled slowly. He didn't speak. He just read the words again and let them settle. Josie leaned against the porch railing beside him. "It's official," she said. "No one can take it now. Not Harlan. Not the banks. Not even the governor. If he changes his mind." Clayton folded the letter and looked out at the spring. "No one should have tried to own it in the first place," he said. "It was never meant to be buried." Josie nodded. "That's why it came up through fire." They sat together a while, listening to the wind move through the grass. A wagon passed on the road, 2 young boys driving, their barrels full of water. They waved. Clayton raised a hand in return. Behind the cabin, rows of new trees lined the edge of the spring, planted by school children the week before. Each one bore a name. Silas. Bain. Josie's mother. Even the sheriff had planted one, quiet and red-faced, saying only, "About time I got my hands dirty again." None of the old fears had disappeared entirely, but they had loosened, and where fear had ruled, something else had begun to grow. Not just water, not just crops, but trust, belief. Clayton looked at Josie. "Funny," he said, "how you start digging for one thing and find something else." "You didn't just dig," she said softly. "You stood your ground. That's what changed the town." He shook his head. "What changed the town was watching truth rise from the ground, and knowing we'd all seen it together." She took his hand. It was warm, steady, real. The spring trickled behind them, soft and endless. And somewhere deeper beneath the earth, where silence once reigned, peace had finally taken root. "Bye-bye,"